High Performance Vet Pro Radio.
Welcome to High Performance Vet Pro Radio. Here, you will learn everything you need to know to become a high-performance veterinary professional. We will focus on optimizing your sleep, fitness, nutrition, mental performance, stress response, and work-life balance. Please enjoy these professional interviews with cutting-edge content from Dr. Jennifer Quammen and human performance coach Ryan Smith from hyperfliving.com.
And welcome back. This is Ryan Smith with High Performance Living and High Performance Vet Pro Radio. Today's guest is going to be a great interest to the veterinary professional community, from everybody from the students to board-certified surgeons. And we get to talk with a neuroscientist, Dr. Andrew Hill from TruBrain, as well as at UCLA. And he's received his PhD in Cognitive Neuroscience from UCLA in 2012, right?
Yes, exactly.
All right. And he's been studying how attention operates in the brain. He's been employed as a lecturer at UCLA over the past few years and teaches multidisciplinary courses on healthy brain aging, neuroscience, psychology. He's got published chapters on different books and modulating human attention. We could just keep going on and on, but you obviously have quite the background in dealing with our neuroscience and our brain. So welcome to the show, Dr. Andrew Hill.
Great. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thank you. So our audience is kind of a highly motivated, very intelligent group of veterinary professionals. These are people that have typically fought to get into veterinary school. They're really, really competitive to get in there. It's really hard to get into veterinary school. And then I think a lot of them don't realize that whenever they get out, some of the stresses and a lot of the things that they have to deal with, along with, like most college students, the cognitive effects of what they do in college. So wanted to kind of talk to you about that today and get into kind of, I guess, this whole neuroplasticity of the brain, but then talk about some of the ways we can actually improve our brain.
Mm-hmm.
So
well, you've already sort of touched on one of the things that is anti-brain health, if you will, and that's stress. Mm-hmm. Stress is useful when you're trying to deal with, survival. So if you're being chased by a tiger, you better feel anxious. But the next moment when you're not being chased by a tiger or when your life is not as stressful, ideally the brain ramps down again, the body ramps down and is not sort of prepared to act and is more in, learning, growth, repair modes. So this is really true for learning. The sort of stress hormone cortisol rises when you're stressed. And if you're chronically stressed, cortisol becomes sort of high levels and does not vary with stressors in the environment. Mm-hmm. And that shuts down everything from memory consolidation to access to your emotions, even some sort of higher level cognitive resources, things we think of as most human, are a little bit impaired when our stress level is chronically high.
Right.
As a student, the consequences for performance, beyond your academic performance, if you're stressed out, your roommate, your spouse, whomever is sort of around you notices that. But after you're in the sort of or out of the academic world, these chronic stressors can really impair day-to-day performance. And I'm sure for your veterinary professionals, they're making healthcare decisions, certainly in life and death decisions, right, for patients, on a daily basis. So keeping your stress level managed appropriately, right, so you have enough sort of physiologic arousal to make good decisions, to stay on, but not so stressed that you're in reactive mode and shutting down, access to memory and good judgment.
Right.
Is key.
So it's not necessarily about, because we're not going to be able to remove the stressors themselves, it's more about the stress response.
Yeah, exactly. Having a stress response that is sort of graded appropriately for the environment and then fluctuates so that when you're not stressed, you can sort of relax again, as it were.
Right. So with stress, like some of the other things that I know that a lot of them are going to deal with would be other things that to me are cognitive dissonance, I guess you could say, would be like sleep, exercise, nutrition, any of those lack of or too much of could also be causing a lot of issues. So how would you say that those kind of fit in there as well?
Well, certainly sleep is a big one. Many folks are chronically sort of dysregulated in sleep. This is very true of the student population, be it undergrad or grad students pursuing advanced training. But it tends to be true of Westerners in general. We get 5-6 hours of sleep a night, many of us. We stay up late and look at screens, televisions, computers, cell phones, until the moment we go to bed, which sort of disrupts the sleep architecture a little bit. And so, just as important it is to manage the stressors you're exposing yourself to, it's also important to sort of keep bolstering resources. And sleep architecture is a very, very large, modifiable behavior. Right. To some extent, in brain health, you have to think in terms of modifiable behaviors, things you can do to affect your brain. I'm not going to suggest that folks go out and get surgeries to their brain to affect their mental health.
Right.
But there are many, many things you can do that are often very small changes day to day that can have massive impacts on especially things like stress management and arousal, physiologic arousal management.
Right. And I know you've got a background in neurofeedback, biofeedback, along as we'll talk here in a moment about neurotropics and smart drugs as well. So how does kind of that biofeedback, if you've got somebody that potentially is a veterinary professional, I mean, they're used to, in some ways, biofeedback as well as testing lots of things from their patients. How are things that they can easily put this into their life? What would you consider as a feedback tool that they can utilize?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of biofeedback and neurofeedback, which is just biofeedback on the central nervous system, a lot of that is technologically assisted and takes a little bit of infrastructure to get going. For folks that are trying to not remediate deficits but just manage a good, healthy brain, I would say that biofeedback can be very useful. There's a very accessible form of biofeedback called HRV, Heart Rate Variability.
Right.
Which is sort of like technologically assisted meditation.
Right.
But I would encourage folks to, look at some HRV tools. There's a few different pieces of hardware out there. But more importantly, or perhaps more accessibly, a very brief, 20-minute a day meditation practice will actually do fairly dramatic things to stress response, to brain tissue. It'll help the brain become sort of healthier and have more self-control and manage the stress response better. And those benefits, as it were, start showing up after a few weeks of meditation. So, there's many, many options for sort of hacking the brain and going in and doing things.
Right.
And they tend to fall on a continuum of, from relatively accessible and low cost and somewhat effective to very expensive and less accessible, but also very powerful. Mindfulness and meditation tend to fall into the best of both of those. They're very accessible. I mean, you're always walking around carrying your brain, hopefully.
Right.
And you always have the ability to sit and, direct your attention. And to a very large extent, modern mindfulness techniques as well as classic meditation techniques are just attention training. Attention exercises. And if you, practice training your attention, sustaining your attention or making your attention flexible, these skills translate into different stress responses when you're, walking around and not meditating, so to speak.
Right. Yep. And very familiar with the HRV. We've actually had Howard Martin from Heart Math on the show as well. I've also been for several years working with the folks over at Sweetwater Health as far as the HRV stuff there and Sweet Beet Life. So very familiar with that. We've actually talked about that on the show. So it's a great way, as well as just the mindfulness. I myself practice 10 to 15 minutes of meditation every morning. First thing I do, I get out of the bed, I drink usually around 16 ounces of water, usually with a little Himalayan salt in it, and then practice usually 10 to 15 minutes of meditation to start my day. So kind of helps me set my intention for the day, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's a few other things you could do to sort of maximize the benefits of that. One is to sort of hack your sleep a little bit so that the sleep architecture ends up being a little more sound.
Right.
The easiest way to do that is to get up at the exact same time every day.
Right.
So regardless if you had a late night, doesn't really matter. Get up so that you're getting the same entrainment signal into your brain in terms of what time of day it is. So I encourage folks to try to get up within an hour after dawn and get some of that morning sunlight in their face. And that will more strongly entrain the circadian rhythm to match up to the Earth's photo period, the daylight cycle. So just a little bit of consistency in getting up early in the morning will keep your brain more tightly locked, if you will, to the 24-hour cycle of the planet, which has profound benefits to health, or at least there's profound things that can go wrong when your photoperiod and the Earth's photoperiod get out of sync, including dysregulated stress response, dysregulated sleep, emotion, mood, attention. So just a simple hack of getting up in the first hour after dawn every day. Maybe you can do your 10 or 15 or 20-minute meditation with some sunlight streaming in the window or something.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Some great points. Yeah. I mean, we talk about sleep, and we've actually done some posts and things on sleep. It's another one of those areas, and I've worked with a company that's in Finland, that's MFit, that actually does some sleep monitoring devices that have been developed over there. So lots of different things that's there. So let's change gears just a moment then. Let's talk about a couple of the other dysregulators, I guess. So what about exercise and nutrition?
Yeah. So exercise, do it. That's the short answer. I think the best exercise, the best use of exercise is remaining active. I don't think you necessarily need to lift weights or run or bicycle, but you need to do something routinely. So I encourage folks to try to get a few hours of active output, as it were, every week, but also day to day. If you're finding yourself in a sedentary job or a sedentary mode where you're not moving for several hours because you're doing paperwork, sitting behind a computer screen, whatever it is, it's really important to get up and move around and get your blood flowing and your muscles moving, at least once an hour for a few minutes. In terms of nutrition, I'm a big proponent of sort of high-fat, low-sugar diets.
Great.
And what that really means is, avoiding pretty much all starches in your diet. No sugars from non-vegetable sources is sort of an easy rule of thumb to follow.
Right. So
no bread, no sugar, no soda, no, even sugary fruits are potentially problematic. And the reason I'm such a strong proponent of this is many of the sort of diseases of aging, these long-term chronic deficits that emerge that are considered, natural or normal, to become a little more slow in reaction time and executive function as you get old is not unusual. It's considered normal aging, but it's a slightly avoidable. And a lot of the diseases of aging have an insulinogenic component. Cancer and diabetes are both driven by insulin a little bit. And even Alzheimer's and other degenerative brain diseases of aging seem to have an insulin component to them. So if you can keep really high-quality fats coming in and keep your cells healthy, whether incorporating these fats into the cell walls and membranes, while you are not spiking your insulin, you are reducing a lot of the risks through not triggering inflammation or oxidation of fats. So it's really fairly key to keep that sugar down. And I give folks a rule of thumb if they ask that they should probably never at one sitting have more than about 20 grams of carbohydrates. And for folks that are adults who are moderately active, I often pick a somewhat arbitrary threshold of 65 or 70 grams of carbs a day. And if you're an athlete who's, high levels of physical output, maybe that could go to 100 or 120 grams a day. But if you never have more than 15 or 20 grams at a sitting, you're never going to spike your blood sugar.
Right.
And you're never going to sort of put the needle all the way over to the right. And a lot of the ways that insulin gets dysregulated is through lack of sensitivity and signaling. So, really high and really low insulin is, of course, an issue, but much more critically long term is the lack of variability in the insulin as a signal in the body. And so keeping your insulin never sort of spiked all the way up allows the body to really increase the sensitivity of the signaling in the range, in the healthy range, which can dramatically reduce the risks long term of many things that we would suffer through both aging as well as through chronic sort of stress responses and things.
Great. Yep. And I'm a huge proponent of the same thing. Getting that. I don't want to go after and say it's the paleo diet, because it's definitely not, because many times the paleo diet is, hey, let's look at what we were historically, but at the same time is our food quality is different. Lots of things are different now than they were in the paleo era. But so to me, it's about how can we reduce inflammation? How can we do things that are going to take away from our performance? And how can we get rid of those processed items? I guess our body is a food processor, not designed to eat processed foods.
There you go. So
I completely, that's everything that I found in kind of 25 years of human performance is exactly what you're talking about there.
Right.
So I kind of want to move on then. So I want to get into this area of expertise where you've kind of gone on and are working with TruBrain, and as well as talking about smart drugs. So this has been a big thing. The movie a couple of years ago, Bradley Cooper with Limitless, and then even most recently, was it Lucy that has Scarlett Johansson and Morgan Freeman in it and stuff, which is I just saw an advertisement is coming out this week on DVD. So a lot of things that are coming on about smart drugs, and these are obviously the sci-fi action thriller kinds of things. But where do neurotropics, smart drugs kind of play into it, and then how do the things we've already talked about even affect the use of those?
Yeah, so as a broad category, there's this new term coming out that your readers or listeners may have come across called nootropic, Nootropic. Nous, N-O-O-S, is, I think, Greek for the mind.
Okay.
And so a nootropic is, to break the word down, promoting growth, support, health in some way of the mind. And these are sort of cognitive support compounds, broadly speaking. These are a little bit different. I mean, nootropics are similar to things we might call smart drugs or cognitive enhancers. I think there's a fine distinction to be made, though. In general, the original definition of nootropics, which was coined in the late 60s, early 70s, emphasizes that these compounds are neuroprotective and reduce risks from damage from environmental risks like lack of oxygen or brain injury. But they also tend to promote cognition, meaning attention, memory, focus, without side effects. And that's very key. I mean, in Limitless, and Bradley Cooper's vehicle there, he had incredible performance. And then about halfway into the movie, things got a little bit weird. He became dependent on the drug. He started missing time. He had all these crazy, weird side effects.
Right.
That should not happen if you're actually taking a true, quote-unquote, nootropic. Unfortunately, a lot of people in this country and other countries abuse psychostimulants as if they're nootropics. I mean, the Adderall sort of epidemic is rampant on college campuses now.
Right.
And psychostimulants, Adderall, Ritalin, even caffeine to some extent, and other more powerful psychostimulants that have more side effects like modafinil and things. They're just not sort of the best option. There's many things out there that have almost no side effects, that are not habit forming, that don't have tolerance, that you can take day in, day out without any issue. So as people get into cognitive hacking, as it were, and brain hacking and taking these compounds, I think that there's really a personal responsibility to not go after the newest, most buzzwordy compound just because there's marketing dollars behind it. It's important to pick things that have been out for many, many years, have a fairly well understood safety profile and efficacy profile.
Right.
The proliferation of smart drugs is huge right now, and every day there's a new, sort of code name compound with letters and numbers in its name that, people on the internet are having bulk manufactured in China and then selling in the U.S.
Right.
It's a wild west out there now in smart drugs. And you have to really be careful, and it's a little difficult to sort of navigate all of these options. Mm-hmm. This is one of the reasons that I got together with Chris Thompson and we initially created TruBrain, because I had sort of assembled a stack, if you will, a combination of nootropic compounds for myself, and was sharing them with friends and family and writing down lists of ingredients to test out and try. And we sort of came up with, Chris and I came up with a really good starting place for nootropics and TruBrain, and brought together a lot of other neuroscientists and neurochemists and people to sort of help us figure out the best starting place for the average consumer who didn't have a degree in neuroscience and didn't necessarily want to spend, weeks and months poring through the literature and trying to figure out what was a safe and effective compound. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, we're trying to this is not a medical model. The one big difference between smart drugs and nootropics is smart drugs, and I would consider Adderall and Ritalin in the smart drug category.
Right.
These things are often prescribed for specific reasons, to remediate deficits, to eliminate ADHD or, mild cognitive impairment or some other kind of deficit. Mm-hmm. And nootropics, in contrast, are often used for long-term benefits when you don't have a deficit, either to reduce risks of aging or other damage long-term, but to get slight boosts day to day that are above your sort of typical performance level. The compound people, of course, most familiar with that does this is probably caffeine.
Right.
And I'm a big proponent of coffee. I think it's one of the most brain healthy things you can do. I think the literature shows between 2 and 4 cups of coffee a day have fairly profound neuroprotective effects in the brain, reducing your risks of long-term aging, reducing your risks of some of the diseases of aging like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And some of this is through managing the insulin system. Some of it's through the antioxidants in coffee. I think Westerners probably get more antioxidants from coffee than all other sources combined.
Right.
So I'm definitely not anti-coffee, but I wouldn't call coffee a nootropic because it does have side effects. It suppresses appetite, it's habit forming. If you've got heart, kidney, or stomach issues, the acids in coffee can be fairly extreme, and the caffeine itself can cause, of course, heart issues.
Right.
But barring any, contraindications because of heart or kidney problems, then I would encourage folks to, drink coffee every day, of course, without sugar.
Right.
So
yeah, and I love my coffee as well, but for me, I'm really, really particular about my coffee. I know if anybody's familiar with Dave Asprey and the Bulletproof Coffee and the whole Bulletproof diet, there's a lot of talk that goes on there about the mold and the toxins that actually come from coffee.
I think that's actually fairly much a non-issue in this country and has been basically since we've had modern coffee.
Okay.
I really do think the mycotoxin issue is a FUD, a fear, uncertainty, and doubt manufactured marketing issue. It's not real.
Okay.
I think that getting small batch, single origin, organic coffee is wonderful.
Right.
But do you need to get mycotoxin free coffee? I would say every coffee in this country is mycotoxin free. There's been a few studies by third parties recently looking at various brands and testing, commercial supermarket coffee for mycotoxins.
Right.
There just aren't any.
They're just not there.
It's just not. It's just non-issue. It hasn't been, since we've been having modern sort of agriculture in this country, for 50 years.
Right.
It's just not been an issue.
Cool.
That being said, there are things you can do to improve your coffee, and I do sometimes put butter in my coffee, a la Dave Asprey. Mm-hmm. But more importantly is putting cream, not milk, in my coffee.
Right.
And avoiding sugar. And, if any of your listeners balked at the idea of using unsweetened coffee, I would challenge you to drink your coffee without sweetener for about 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And over that time, you will probably bitter adapt.
Yes.
So suddenly coffee stops being this bitter black, liquid that you have to sweeten and starts having these nuances of flavor you may never have noticed in the presence of the sugar. And so I'd encourage your listeners to try dropping the sugar out or the sweeteners, and even artificial sweeteners, even sort of non-insulinogenic sweeteners.
Right.
If your insulin system is at all compromised, if you have sort of the Western metabolic syndrome or you have a high starch, high carb diet, even artificial sweeteners, aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, these things will cause an insulin response potentially, just from the taste of it.
Right.
So, try the bitter adaptation experiment. It's remarkably enjoyable after the first few days if you aren't expecting it. So.
Yep. So what about also, and I want to go back to the smart drugs here, but on the coffee thing, what about the people that talk about that, having that coffee creating a adrenal fatigue or even an adrenal exhaustion that comes from because you're constantly spiking that?
I'm not sure that there's any good literature that validates the idea of adrenal fatigue. I think this is another one of those stalking horses of, it's a popular faddish idea that I don't really think has any real benefit. Yes, you can be overwhelmed and you can be sort of stressed and your adrenals can be overworked, but actually adrenal fatigue is a thing. I'm not sure, again, that it really exists. That being said, caffeine and coffee can make you feel jittery, and if you drink an extra cup, you can get decreased performance. There's the inverted U of performance, the Yerkes-Dodson curve, a little bit of arousal of any sort, stress, physiologic arousal, wakefulness, a little bit of that is good. It improves performance, and then you end up sort of getting more stressed or more pressure, and then the performance starts to drop on the far side of that curve. There's one nootropic or smart drug compound that is in tea leaves. It's called L-theanine. It's an amino acid, and it tends to make you feel calm. If you've ever gotten that sort of calm, smooth push from drinking a lot of tea, probably that experience that founded the British Empire, this sort of keep calm and carry on experience.
Right.
That often comes from, I believe, the combination of caffeine and L-theanine in the tea leaves. And so you can buy L-theanine really at any sort of supermarket or drugstore, and it's a very innocuous, low-key compound. We think it crosses into the brain and releases GABA, the neurotransmitter GABA, which is sort of alpha wave promoting, that calm sort of, resting in a neutral state mind. And so I actually, folks that are interested in nootropics, but they aren't willing to start swallowing lots of random capsules or drinks, I often recommend they start with just adding some L-theanine. I take a capsule of L-theanine with your coffee. That's it. And it tends to modify the experience of coffee. It's still fairly subtle, but enough so it's a nice entree into the nootropic sort of self-hacking or experimentation land, if you will.
Great, good, great place to start. I've taken it myself. It's definitely has that, as you said, calming effect to it, and really like that. And kind of sometimes if you get that little bit of too much coffee, or you've just a little too wired, it just takes off the rough edges.
Yeah. And we actually put L-theanine in the TruBrain products as well. TruBrain, of course, is one of the companies I work for and helped found. We initially launched TruBrain with what we call now the original, which is capsules.
Okay.
And TruBrain has many ingredients in it that are nootropics or cognitive enhancers. But L-theanine is definitely one of the compounds that we rely on for the effects. We now have drinks as well, 1 ounce sort of tear off bottles that have the similar set of compounds. Not everyone wants to swallow pills,
right?
And so we produced a drink version that is sort of like little energy. We call them think drinks instead of energy drinks.
Awesome.
But they're all full of nootropic compounds. I've already mentioned L-theanine. The other really big there's another very common nootropic compound people end up experimenting with, some form of choline. Now, of course, choline's in eggs, but there's other forms that tend to get into the brain more easily. Alpha GPC is a form of choline that's useful, and CDP choline or citicholine is a form that's very useful. And these versions are both in TruBrain as well. The citicholine in the capsules and alpha GPC is going into the drinks. And choline, when it gets into the brain, is used in cell walls and membranes. but it's also used as a raw material to make acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter involved with memory and attention.
Right.
So a lot of the drugs that make you feel like you're more on, you're paying attention more, have a cholinergic. They boost acetylcholine in some way, or they boost dopamine. I mean, all the psychostimulants boost dopamine fairly directly, and dopamine is a reward signal. It's the sort of, yes, this is interesting to pay attention to. This is appetitive or useful or yummy or sexy, whatever it is. If you find something interesting or rewarding, it's producing some dopamine in your brain. And on that rationale, we included tyrosine in TruBrain as well. Tyrosine is another amino acid, and tyrosine is one of the precursors for the brain making dopamine. So if you're either somebody who's been abusing stimulants long term, or somebody who may have issues with dopamine, let's say you have some attention problems in general, we felt that tyrosine signaling and or dopamine production might be impaired, and so we included tyrosine in the blend of TruBrain. Some other compounds we included some magnesium, again as a buffer, like the L-theanine, to make people give them some benefits of not being over-aroused and overstimulated if they're stressed, but also magnesium tends to help cells to fire, help nerve cells especially to fire. So it's sort of a buffer, both managing overactivation or potentially underactivation of these cells.
Okay.
There's another big class of compounds that are sort of the poster children for nootropics, and those are called the racetams.
Right.
The first one, the sort of initial racetam that was discovered, is called piracetam. And piracetam is, and all the racetams, they were sort of initially synthesized from the neurotransmitter GABA. And they have a very similar structure, although it looks like they might bind to glutamate receptors, at least partially, and glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It tends to boost energy. And we think that piracetam and the other racetams may also mediate acetylcholine to make it easier to pay attention. It's fairly common to get what we call the windshield wiper fairy if you're taking racetams, where the world becomes a little quieter, a little clearer, a little crisper. And we put piracetam in the capsules and oxiracetam, which is a slightly longer acting and better tasting racetam, in the drinks.
Okay.
So yeah.
Wow. So we got quite the stack, because I'm fairly familiar with all the ones myself. Now, a lot of our listeners are not going to be familiar with those as much as I am, because I kind of nerd out on all these things.
Sure.
But yeah, so earlier we were talking about the protective effects, and also the fact that there's really no side effects to these, as basically natural derived products, right? So, so from somebody, when we were talking about nutrition, we were talking about exercise, we were talking about stress. So these are things that are going to be neuroprotective for them. So they don't have to be on the perfect diet. It'd be better if they would, but if they're not,
yeah. I've sort of tried to do a broad approach to fill gaps that I think people might be experiencing.
Okay.
And some of that's nutritive. I mean, putting magnesium in is really nutritive, because I wanted to account for the possibility somebody did not have ideal nutrition and didn't have enough magnesium, and therefore wouldn't get as much of the effect from the piracetam and the choline. So we added magnesium. And some things are purely about cellular energy. We added some acetyl L-carnitine, and carnitine's involved with energy production by the mitochondria in cell. It's purely for that cellular energy support, so to speak. Or fish oil. Initially it was fish oil. Now we use algae form DHA, which is an omega-3 fatty acid.
Right.
The brain is, I forget, about 40% probably DHA. And the body will incorporate whatever fats it gets in the diet into cell membranes. It needs to be rebuilding these things all the time. So if the fats that it's getting are the highest quality fats that are best used for the brain, then the cells are being repaired and being built with better compounds, better components. And so we included DHA as an omega-3 fatty acid in there as well, from really a nutritive support point of view. So there's things that get sort of used up, if you will, like tyrosine. There's things to buffer the whole system, like L-theanine and magnesium. There's nutritive things like carnitine and DHA. And then there's the heavy lifters in the nootropic world, like choline and piracetam. So we really took a systematic and strategic approach when building this blend of compounds. One of the things, if your listeners do some digging, they'll see in self-report is piracetam and other racetams have slightly unusual variability of effects. Not everyone gets the same effects or doesn't get an effect. And we really figured that that was mostly because of their individual differences in baseline nutrition and baseline brain activity.
Right.
And so we added many of these compounds to the nootropic blend or stack to make the effects much more consistent across individual, mostly. And so you don't have to hunt and peck and find, what's going to work for you.
Yeah, I guess that's really the challenge for most people, with supplementation, with whatever it is that not understanding that it is really, you are an N=1 research study, right? You've got to figure out what's going to work for you, but at the same time is, a broad-based multivitamin is most likely not going to be the exact thing for you because you're going to have differences in your own biology, as well as trying to go through and pick out all the individual supplements that you need is also probably not going to work for you because you're either going to be choosing a lot of different things that are not going to work for you. And of course, the vast majority of people are going by marketing, right? They're educated by marketing versus, looking at the science behind it. So I think it's a great whenever you've blended that, you're saying, okay, what can we do to help? And let's use our experience and our expertise to create this.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of a curation play in TruBrain. To some extent, this was because after a few years of using nootropics, I got tired of having my friends and family, keep coming back to me as the nootropics guy. Hey, can you write that list of ingredients down again? Or my mom would call me every 3 to 6 months and say, "I'm out of piracetam. Please send more."
Right.
And so at some point, the amount of people who were interested in this and who had sort of been turned on to these compounds by me and were still sort of self-experimenting got a little bit unmanageable, as a sort of hobby advice I was giving. And as I finished up my PhD, I founded this TruBrain with Chris and several other neuroscientists. And then, of course, did this at the same time I was launching a neurofeedback company. So we brought a whole team of people into the TruBrain side for supply chain and testing and further research. Wow. You did mention that people have different effects, and that's one of the challenges of these things. One is to not just pursue compounds that are what I call buzzword compliant.
Right.
One rule of thumb that I tell people who are thinking about buying compounds is you don't want to buy a mix of ingredients that has 1,000 things in it and hides the amount under a proprietary blend label. Because what that means is they're doing, in the supplement industry, this is called fairy dusting, where you put little tiny amounts of sexy compounds in there, but you don't put enough effective amounts of anything.
Right.
It's really the marketing that's driving the recipe. So there's only 7 or 8 ingredients in TruBrain. We intentionally have a very small number, but enough of each ingredient. So I would encourage your folks to think about that when you're looking at your own selection of nootropics or cognitive support compounds. If there's the word proprietary blend on the label, they don't tell you how much of each ingredient. It's probably suboptimal,
right,
to some extent.
Yep. And these are a lot of people as well because these are as veterinary professionals, they're prescribing lots of medicines, and a lot of the animal medicines are actually human medicines as well, or
exactly.
They're used to dealing with this, and even sometimes they're dealing with compounding pharmacies or whatnot as well. But to be able to know, hey, this is exactly what I'm getting here, and to understand the biology of it because they have that background, they're going to, I guess, probably understand a little bit more, or at least have the wherewithal to go and research it a little bit more.
Exactly. And, we have started to do some research in TruBrain on the actual compound blend that we've produced. Of course, all the individual compounds that make up TruBrain have, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of history.
Right.
And many, many research papers on animals and humans. So we think we have a handle on what all these things are doing separately, and they're fairly safe and fairly, supporting cognition. But one thing that TruBrain's doing differently is we're actually doing our own research, and we've run now something in the neighborhood of 40 people through brain mapping, EEG brain mapping on and off TruBrain. And some of this was done as a pilot study with interns. Some of it was done as a placebo-controlled double-blind study with stock traders. And I recently did one last month on the health and wellness editor of Rob Report, and did her pre and post brain maps with TruBrain. And we're seeing a lot of the same changes. It's sort of a converging story in that it looks like TruBrain is helping the brain produce more alpha and more beta waves, fast alpha and low beta.
Okay.
Fast alpha is sort of a flow state, cognitively ready. Alpha in general is a neutral brainwave. You're sort of preparing to do something, but you aren't actually using resources. And if you can then switch into a faster mode, beta, at will, you can sort of bring your mind on. And we're seeing enhancements of resting baseline power, both in general and on task, in performance conditions. And pretty much everyone I've looked at is showing these same changes, this increase of faster alpha and slower beta power, especially in the temporal lobes and the parietal cortex, which are involved with sort of memory, visualization, and visual attention. So we think we're onto something in this exact combination of compounds. But of course, there's more research to be done. We aren't a massive pharma organization, right. So we're still a startup that's about 2 years old now.
Okay.
And we're being a scrappy company in the research as well as everything else that a startup has to do. So,
well, very cool. Well, good luck with that. Continue with the obviously the growth of that. Obviously we're in a very growth oriented society, especially around for small businesses and the entrepreneurial spirit, I guess you would say, and the information age that's kind of kicked in with that. So that's awesome. So how do people kind of find about the TruBrain stack, the information, and
Sure.
Where can they get information on that?
So the easiest place is TruBrain.com, TRU brain. There's no E in that word.
Okay.
And folks can check me out on Twitter if they want, Andrew Hill, PhD. Pretty easy to remember. It's a great place to contact me. And of course, I'm available via TruBrain.com, as well as my neurofeedback and brain mapping clinic, which is the AlternativesBrainInstitute.com.
Very cool. I will put those in the show notes so that people can link to those easily.
Great.
So, yes, well, obviously want to be cognizant of everybody's time, yours as well as all of our listeners. So definitely want to thank you again for being on the show. This is great information. It goes along with a lot of what we talk about whenever we are trying to help these veterinary professionals lead a higher performance life. It's not about, hey, let's get rid of suicide, which we want that, but we want to take all these people and take them to that next level. And these are the types of things that we want to introduce them to.
Yeah, and the options for sort of self, management of brain and cognitive health, I think just the options are proliferating with technology, with modern medicine. So this is an area folks can really make some change in. 30, 40, 50 years ago, there was much less we could do.
Right.
Now, folks that are 50, 60, 70, 80 years old are looking like people did 20 years older, a few decades ago. So you have more years in your life. Let's try to have some more life in your years.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer that because I myself, today's my 47th birthday, but we had, but I honestly, I don't feel older than 25, maybe 30.
Right.
It's like but I've got 25 years as an exercise and fitness professional and wellness professional, but at the same time is all these things I try to put, the sleep, the stress, all of those things into perspective in my life. And I truly believe that it keeps me much younger than I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, well, great. Well, I really appreciate it being on the show. Thanks again for joining, for being on. I would like to thank everybody for listening to High Performance Vet Pro Radio. And if you like what we have, please leave us a comment on iTunes, Stitcher Radio. You can visit us at highperfliving.com. I'll also have all the show notes up on the blog as well as in the on the podcast. So until next time, live your life to a higher standard and have a great week.
Thank you for joining us at High Performance Vet Pro Radio. We hope to hear from you soon. Like this episode? Leave us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. It helps us to reach more veterinary professionals. For more information or to contact us, please visit us at highperfliving.com. Until next time, remember to live every day with intention.